So we're speaking with Jack Carr, a very successful author, former Navy SEAL, retired, and followed his next passion, which was to write fiction. And he's got 7 books in the Terminal List series, and now has come out with a new nonfiction book called Targeted Beirut. And we're coming to you on the John Fredericks Radio Network across the up and down the eastern seaboard. And we're also on the CDM platform on their 13 global platforms and media outlets. They stand for the truth. They're being throttled. They're being censored. They want to get the message out. We're honored to be on their platform. So, Jack, one of the things that surprised me about the books that I've listened to so far in the Terminal List is the amount of redaction, particularly in True Believer, that is present there. These are fictional works. Can you help me understand where our national security interests lie in redacting elements of a nonfiction book, or of a fictional book, rather?
Yeah. So I wanted to be just extra safe because it was so close to me being in the military. So I sent the first one into the Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review just to be safe. And they came back with, I think it was just 9 redactions. So it wasn't too bad. And they got back, they said they were supposed to get back in 30 days. They got back in 45. And I thought that's pretty good for a government agency. And so I just kept those in there because I didn't know, because are you supposed to now write around those things? And if you do, are you supposed to send it back? Because how do they know what you wrote around? The whole thing is totally ridiculous because there's nothing that keeps anybody from writing a screenplay. There's nothing that could prevent someone from going on cable news channel and talking without having their speech checked by the censors, as it were. So I sent it in, did that, published it with the redactions in there. Second one, same thing, sent it in. And 1 month passes, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. I have to push my publication date from, I think it was from March to end of July, which was not helpful. And they came back with, I think it was 54 redactions, either sentences, words, paragraphs, whatever. But this time now I have a couple attorneys. And so I have them tie every single redaction to a publicly available government document. So that means not something that someone else has written or something from Wikipedia, but something that anyone on the planet can download from the United States government itself. And so all 54 of those redactions were tied to publicly available government documents. And none of it was anything that I learned in the SEAL teams. But they came back and I won that appeal. Because there's a set of things you need to do to appeal. I won on 37 of them, I think it was. So what I did was I unredacted them for the paperback so that now people can compare the hardcover to the paperback and see which things that the government thought was worth redacting and what I won on appeal. And so the third book came along and I did that as well. And then I went back to appeal and they said that they would not accept my appeal, even though it was done exactly how you're supposed to do it, how it's laid out, and how the previous book was. So I think they just didn't like that I published the unredacted version after the appeal in paperback. And so anyway, my take from it was that they said, hey, quit bugging us with this fiction, kid. We have very important things to do here in this office on the nonfiction front, and we can't be bothered with you. So going forward, and enough time had passed also between my time in the military and what I'm writing about. So the next one was The Devil's Hand, and that one was all about bioweapons and bioweapons research. And I had no touch point with any of that in the military. I knew nothing about it. That's all research done post-military for that book. Same thing with In the Blood, the next one. There's an AI component to it and quantum computing to it before ChatGPT became part of the lexicon. And same thing, I had no touch points with quantum computing or artificial intelligence in the military. So now I don't send them in.
But you did develop a special relationship with Alice, if I understand it correctly.
That's right. So I'd be surprised if what I describe in The Blood isn't almost exactly like it was at least a couple of years ago when I wrote that book when it comes to AI and quantum computing as far as our capabilities go. Because when you talk to people, you have to do when you're investigating or researching something like that, where I'm starting from ground zero, essentially. Then you talk to as many people as you possibly can. First, you do as much research as you possibly can so that you can ask informed questions. And when you're talking to someone who's spent a lifetime doing this, they can say, as you ask these questions, at least this guy has done some research. He's put in some work ahead of time. So that helps build maybe some trust with that person that you're talking to. And they're very close-lipped, of course, about everything that they're doing in these worlds, but they'll give you a little hint. And then you talk to somebody else who gives you a different hint. And then you talk to somebody else. So you paste this thing together, kind of paste this mosaic together like an investigative journalist would. So that's what I did with the quantum computing AI. That's what I did with the bioweapons research. And to a lesser extent, that's what I did in Only the Dead when it came to finance. I wanted someone, I know nothing about finance, and I wanted someone who had spent a lifetime on Wall Street to read these couple chapters in Only the Dead and say, this guy put in the work. Even if there's a few things that are not quite right, I use a term that's not quite right, they can sense that I put in all this work, and they can say, okay, got it, and respect that I at least took the time to put in the work. So I try to do that with all my books.
How would you divide the time between research and writing? Because I know that you research these books extensively. I mean, my wife and I have talked about it. Like, how does this guy get all this knowledge? I mean, that's got to take just a huge amount of time to develop the information that you're putting into the books.
Yeah, but luckily I have a lot of it just as part of my personal experience, except when it comes to things like what we just talked about, the bioweapons, the AI, the quantum computing, the finance. But a lot of the other things are already a part of me, or I'm aware of them and know where to go to add to that knowledge if it's going to be a part of the book. My original idea was to go somewhere for each of the novels. First one, I'd already been to Iraq and Afghanistan. It was mostly domestic based, so I was good there. I was still in the military when I started writing that. I had about a year and a half left to go. I was dropped my papers and was getting out. Second one, I'd already been to Odessa, Odessa, Ukraine. I'd been there before I was in the military, so I chose that as a location. I'd been to Morocco before my time in the military, so I chose that as a location. I had not been to Mozambique. So I went to Mozambique, even though I didn't have a book deal yet from the first one. I flew to Mozambique, spent a couple weeks on the ground there, getting to know professional hunters, trackers, getting to know the area, the politics of the region, taking pictures of the soil, of the trees, animals, just anything that I could possibly do to add that local boots on the ground flavor to the novel. So my plan, once again, was to do that with every book. Savage Son, I went over to Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia, over there, flew from Anchorage in, because 1 month, I don't even know how it is now with the war in Ukraine, if there are restrictions or not, but back then, I could fly from 1 month a year from Anchorage into Russia. So you don't have to go all the way around the world the rest of the year if you want to get to that same location. So I put boots on the ground in Kamchatka Peninsula because I knew that was going to be a very important part of the book, just like Mozambique was with True Believer. So did that. Then for the next one, COVID hits. And so everything's pretty much on lockdown. Luckily, that was a very domestic focused book as well. The next one, In the Blood, still have these lockdowns, but I really wanted to go to Israel because there's a significant part of the book that takes place in Israel, and I just couldn't get there. If you remember during COVID, if you were trying to get into Israel, even as an Israeli citizen, it was difficult to get in and out of there. They were very strict on it, so couldn't get there. So I sent the manuscript, or I sent that portion of the manuscript to a family in Israel, and they had somebody in their 30s read it, somebody in their 60s, somebody in their 90s read it, and I did so much research because I really wanted to try to get it right. And they all came back and said that they couldn't believe that I hadn't been there for that. So I'll eventually get there. But so that was the point of me saying, as far as research goes, my plan was thwarted by COVID. And now there's so many projects going on. I'd like to get back to that though, where I go to a location. I tried to get back to it for Only the Dead, so 2 books back. And I went to Argentina, and I thought that this certain section of that book was going to take place there. And then even in the outline, it was Argentina. And then I got to that place in the narrative, and it just didn't make sense. It just didn't work naturally. So I'll save Argentina for another time. So for people who have read Only the Dead, the Colorado portions of the book were originally in the outline supposed to be Argentina. But yeah.
So when you ventured into Russia as a writer / journalist, I think that's probably what the Russians would have called you. Weren't you a little concerned about your personal safety? I mean, you're over there poking around and asking questions, and developing sources.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. So this is before the war in Ukraine, of course. So I go over there, I think it was August, maybe September of 2019, I think it was. And I'd been, like I said, to Mozambique doing this similar type of research a couple of years prior. And everyone there wanted to tell me about their country, about the politics, about the poaching situation, about the Chinese influence, mining operations, illegal and legal, and just tell me everything. They're so open and so wonderful in Mozambique. I really just had to ask a question, and it would just flow. I thought the same thing would happen in Russia, because that was one experience doing this. It was Mozambique. Here's my second one. Now I'm going to Russia. Exact opposite. Very quickly, I realized why. Because if someone throughout Russian history is asking questions, kind of like the ones that I'm asking to write a sort of a political thriller where I'm asking questions about government and military and that sort of thing. You weren't long for this world. You were off to the gulag type of a thing. And that's, I think, ingrained in them, this suspicion of people asking questions and what the consequences of answering those questions could be. So very quickly I realized that, oh, this is going to be a different thing over here. But I was also in the backcountry for most of it. So it was a fishing trip and a hunt as well. So I was back there.
And a lot of questions interspersed between. Did anybody ever come and talk to you, question you, feel you out?
No, they made some jokes about me being some sort of a spy or something like that. But eventually, after you warm them up, and a little vodka always works. I learned that in a previous trip that I had taken to Russia a long time ago, and then a military trip that I took to Uzbekistan years ago as well. How the vodka flows freely, and people will share things with you once they start pouring.
Well, I know James Reese liked to offer some of his victims vodka before he did them in, at least one that I read about. So,
yeah, you're already at
well,
the very end.
I happen to remember that because I have a particular fondness for clear liquid. Now, so you do all the research. You get this idea. You in your mind, you develop a storyline and you start to put together an outline. And then you go do the research and then come home to write? Or do you research, write? Is it linear or do you work on parallel tracks? How does that process work?
Yeah, so what I thought was going to happen didn't happen. And that was that I would come up with the concept, come up with an executive summary, come up with the outline, and probably somewhere in that process, I would go somewhere that I knew was going to be vital to the storyline. And I would go to that place and continue working, but also do research. And as I described, that it did not work out that way after the third book due to COVID. But what I've done as far as process has been the same essentially every time. And I like to come up with a title very quickly because I don't want any bandwidth wasted thinking about a title or thinking, oh, geez, I've had great titles so far. I can't mess this one up. So I come up with a title. I come up with a theme that guides the writing process. Each book has a distinct theme. Then I come up with a one-page executive summary, kind of like what you'd read on the back of a paperback or the inside flap of a dust jacket, or maybe a description on Amazon, that sort of a thing. And then I take that one-page executive summary and I turn that into the outline. And then when I get to a certain stage in that outline, I have a beginning, middle, and a few things in between, but I don't let the outline hold me up. Meaning if I just can't figure out how's he going to get out of this in the outline, I don't let that hold me up anymore because I know I have a year to figure it out. It's not like being on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan when I have to make a split-second decision that's going to affect all those around me forever. I can sleep on it. And I can even write a chapter. And if it doesn't work out, I can get up the next morning and change it. So
do you sit and type? You type at a computer? You type it all out yourself?
Yeah, type it all out. And then I'm doing research. So I get to a part now, like let's say for Only the Dead, where I get to that finance part. Oh boy, here I go. So I do as much research as I possibly can and write it out. And then I'll send it to people in the world of finance, or I did in that one anyway, those chapters, and say, hey, what am I doing wrong here? And can I talk to you about this? Here's the general storyline. And this is what I want to get. This is the intent of these chapters. Can we jump on a call and talk it through? And so that's kind of how it plays out.
I've got 2 more pages of questions, and the clock is just running like crazy.
But we can do it again sometime.
Well, I certainly hope so. But let's move on for just a moment. You and I think, share a lot of the same beliefs, one of which is, I think in one of your books, you said, and I don't know whether this is your perspective coming through in the book or whether it was a fictional account that someone made, but that you consider JFK's assassination the day that America lost its innocence. I certainly do believe that. Give us an idea of exactly where you're coming from. And to me, it sets up a whole cascade of dominoes that we see falling one at a time that cause me great concern for my children and grandchildren.
Oh, sure. I think every book thus far, I've mentioned the JFK assassination in one way, shape, or form. Not that it's a major plot element, but it's part of a conversation or part of somebody remembering something or somebody taking a lesson from it and applying it to a current problem set that's fictional in the story. So I think I've mentioned it in every one, and that is because it was such a turning point in the history of our country. Really, you have the reorganization of the intelligence services and the military after World War II, 1947. Now they're not called the Department of War, Secretary of War. Now it's a Department of Defense and a Secretary of Defense. And we build this essentially a system and an ecosystem that still exists today. Self-licking ice cream cone type in some cases. But we build this entire military and intelligence establishment that has only continued to grow over time, has only continued to have larger budgets, more power. And when we look at 1963 and you look at the Warren Commission in particular, why was it not called the Dulles Commission report? Because Alan Dulles ran.
Thank you very
that.
much.
There's just too many questions lingering, and there were too many opportunities for presidents to declassify documents that they neglected to do so, even after there is a law passed that says they must by a certain date. That date came and gone. They tried to use COVID for a little while about the reasons why they couldn't do it. But all these years later, still not declassifying documents. And yes, we overclassify everything. But November 1963 was a distinct turning point in the history of this country and still continues to impact us today.
So we had on David Talbot, who authored The Devil's Chessboard.
Oh, yeah, it's over here. I got it right here.
Yeah, that's a great book. And The Unspeakable by MacArthur. And then The Men Who Killed JFK by Roger Stone. And we've had all those people on the show. And I was home with the flu on November 22nd, 1963. I was 10 years old. I went downstairs after having slept for like 12 or 15 hours and said, you got to get up if you're ever going to get well. And I walked down the stairs to our black and white TV, and my mom was there. And she said, oh, John, come and sit next to me. And the tone of her voice sounded foreboding. And as a 10-year-old, she was a very loving and nurturing person. The fact that she wanted me to sit next to her wasn't surprising, but the tone of her voice was that something's not right. And I said, Mom, is everything okay? And she said, no, John, the president has been shot. And I did not even know how to assimilate those words. What do you mean the president has been shot? I mean, that was a concept that was so foreign to me, never even entered my psyche that could happen. And then I sat in front of that TV with my folks for the next 4 days and watched the events unfold and developed a very unhealthy obsession about the JFK assassination. It was really not until I read The Devil's Chessboard that all the pieces came into place for me. And I realized that Alan Dulles, I do firmly believe, planned, orchestrated, carried out the assassination of JFK, and that Hoover and Johnson covered it up. So, gets us to the present day. There was an attempt on President Trump's life July the 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania. To me, there are a lot of similarities. How about you, Jack? What do you think?
Well, it's just bizarre. It's just so bizarre that specifically after 1963 and all the security protocols that have been put in place since then, that you leave this building. I mean, once again, just like the withdrawal from Afghanistan, you don't need to have any sort of experience in the military. You don't have to have read a book on strategy or tactics. You don't even have to have watched a military movie. You can look at Afghanistan 2021 and anyone with any common sense could have planned that withdrawal better. You don't need a background or an education in military history, tactics, strategy, operations, anything like that. You could apply common sense to that problem set. Similar thing here. You don't need to have a background in security operations or with the FBI or with the Secret Service or in the military or anything. You could just look at a map and look at the stage and look at where you're putting your security and say, oh, there's a clear line of sight from building Z, whatever, to stage. We should probably put someone there. And to have something so basic not be covered is either total incompetence or something worse.
Well, my personal suspicion is that it's something worse. There was a local police officer, a sniper, who was on the ground. He saw the suspect on the roof after he fired the first three I think after the first three, maybe it was all eight. If Crooks fired 8, and I think he probably did, but maybe not. He fired and actually hit Crooks, according to reports that I've read, including the Congressional Oversight Report, and disabled the AR weapon that Crooks had. But then the Secret Service sniper surely was looking through binoculars or a scope. He surely saw what had happened, yet he elected to shoot Crooks in the head and forever silence him. That seemed a little convenient to me, after Crooks his weapon had been disabled and he had been injured in the shoulder, according to the reports. There's another guy that I've read a lot about named Maxwell Urich. Have you heard that name at all?
I don't think so.
All right. I want you and I to research Maxwell Urich. The belief is, I don't know if you saw it or not, but there was a white van that is not in dispute at all, was towed away by local law enforcement after the attempted assassination. It's a white van. There are multiple eyewitnesses who said that it had Arizona tags on it. Certain YouTubers who I happen to have belief in tracked that van back to Urich Ammunitions in Arizona. Maxwell Urich drove that van ostensibly to Butler, Pennsylvania. He has not been seen since July the 13th. His parents filed a missing persons report on July the 14th. He's not been seen or heard from since. Now, here's the last tidbit I'll give you, and I don't mean to get too far off track or down the weeds, but this is important, I think. I think it's damned important that we not wait 65 years to learn the truth about who tried to kill President Trump. But if you look at pictures of the assassin on the roof with blood coming out, the assassin has a notable scar on his ear. Maxwell Urich used to have those big earrings. I don't know what you call them. What do you call them, Q? Gauges. And he took them out. And so his ear healed and there was a scar left. There is no picture, nothing, and no picture I've seen with Crooks having earrings or a scar in his ear. So you look at that picture and Crooks and Urich look very much alike. They're very similar age. And there's a lot of belief that Maxwell Urich had a role in the attempted assassination. He is gone supposedly off the face of the earth. Maybe it's him on top of the roof. I don't know. I'm not saying that it was. And just last point, I'm sitting here saying these things and I'm starting to think, well, I'm just a conspiratorialist. But that is a manipulation to me, pure and simple, to get us to stop asking questions. Because anyone who could invent something like that must be clearly off their rocker and a conspiratorialist. Well, I don't know, but I'm not buying the government line on July the 13th, and I'd like to know more. Maybe you would go research it, and I'll help you.
Maybe, but I will say is that I, unfortunately, that I would not be surprised if it ends up being government incompetence. Just having seen so much over the last, with my experience in government, I can just say I can see that as well being like a plausible explanation. Like, yes, there are so many people that are so incompetent at all these levels for whatever reasons. That's a whole nother conversation.
That's our next conversation. I'll stay here all afternoon, but I know you've got an appointment. I'm a man of my word. I said an hour and we're at 62 minutes. I need to let you go, but I sure have enjoyed it. Please come back, and best wishes for your book. I know it's going to be a bestseller. And hey, we launched your book tour right here today on The Truth.
Hey, we did it.
I'm awesome. Gordon, and we've heard
really
a lot of truth today. Thank you, Jack Carr. Best wishes. I hope you enjoyed today's program as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. We really thank you for tuning in every Saturday, and we appreciate our audience. Write to us, johngordontruth@gmail.com. That's all one word, johngordontruth@gmail.com. Give us your thoughts, comments, criticisms. We'll certainly listen and, if appropriate, respond back to you on the air. I'd like to ask you one small little favor. If you watch us on Getter or Rumble or YouTube, if you would just go to one of those streaming services and hit the subscribe button, it would do a huge amount of good to help us reach more people. So if you'll just do us that one little favor, I'd really appreciate it. Right now, about 10% of the people who watch us on those streaming services subscribe. So if you're watching on one of them, just hit the subscribe button. It costs you nothing. It takes you about a second. And if you like it, then by all means hit the like button. But if you don't, just move on to Dan Bongino, I reckon. Have a great weekend.